If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Welcome to If This Goes On, Don't Panic, episode 22. In this episode, we will be interviewing Paizos gaming software designer and content creator, Graeme Bauman. And this is a great opportunity to introduce our brand new co-host. He's been on the show before, but he's joining the team now. Welcome, Graeme Barber, aka POC Gamer.
Hi.
How are things going?
Yeah, things are going great. Yeah, it's good to be back on the show and good to be here on a regular basis, and I'm really looking forward to talking to Brian.
Awesome. That's awesome.
Nice.
What's happening in your life right now, Graeme? We've been trying to get you on the show for some time, but basically all hell broke loose in your life.
Yeah. Well, in my regular job, we were pretty heavily impacted by the forest fires. So I was doing a lot of work with that stuff, and then unfortunately, my daughter contracted COVID, and toddlers can't self-isolate, so we all got COVID. Fortunately, we were vaccinated and were able to get through that relatively unscathed. And since then, it's just been being quite busy with regular work and with writing for Blue Planet, which I am working on with Jeff Barber of Biohazard Games.
Nice.
We are not related.
Yeah, not related. We have to clarify this.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, in my own life, I'm gearing up for a big event that we do in conjunction with National Novel Writing Month, but independently of, called the Game of Tomes. Since this episode is going to be airing in November, you can probably head over to my Twitch channel if you want to check it out. That's twitch.tv/Sable Aradia. And it's a competition where people choose fictional houses to represent, inspired by the Game of Thrones, obviously. And every 5 days, the house with the lowest word count is eliminated. Some of the members are randomly drafted into the undead horde, and we write to beat each other's word count. So it's a lot of fun, and a lot of arrangement goes into it, so it's been taking a lot of my attention. So
that is intense sounding.
It is. It's pretty intense, but it's worth it. People have so much fun. We had 135 participants last year. We expected like 30, it was our first year. And we did, I think there were about 160 people who participated in the Camp NaNoWriMo version, which doesn't involve eliminations. It's more like a tournament. But lots of people said that it was really helpful to them. I know it was helpful to my word count, so I can't wait to do it again. So when we come back, we'll be joined by Graeme Bauman.
Hey all, you know that here at If This Goes On, we believe that a rising tide lifts all boats. Life is not a zero-sum game.
Aurelia Leo Publishing believes the same thing. If you haven't heard of them, they're a publisher that focuses on disabled, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and other storytellers of color.
They intend to pursue their mission further with their new podcast, Aurelia.
Twice a month, Aurelia will feature reviews, interviews, and short fiction produced by or about disabled, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and other storytellers of color, hosted by our friend Zelda Knight.
They are kicking off with interviews of N.J. Ember in a series of short stories by Edmund Schusel and Miko Rahala, published in the Infinite Metropolis collection.
If you want to hear more about disabled, queer, trans, Black, Indigenous, and other storytellers of color, check them out at aureliapodcast.com. That's AURELIA podcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts.
And we're back. Graeme Bauman has been playing tabletop RPGs for about 25 years, starting with Palladium. He's worked for Paizos for about 4 years as Paizos software architect. Mostly this involves making high-level decisions about how Paizos software needs to work together and coordinate with third-party applications. He also looks after Paizo databases, builds and deploys tools, and manages internal tech processes. Most relevant to today's show, Brian is one of the initial organizing committee volunteers for the brand new United Paizo Workers. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hi, thanks for having me. This is wonderful. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. This is actually this show's existence is my first exposure to the term hope punk, which is a concept that I've long been just very interested in. And so, hey, I've got a new little tidbit of vocabulary to tuck away in the old tool belt for later use. I really dig it.
Yeah, so to start with, I'm very excited about this development, and I can't wait to share this with our audience. What is the United Paizo Workers?
Yeah, so the United Paizo Workers, or UPW, is a brand new, first of its kind tabletop RPG studios union. And currently, and by currently I mean as of last night, currently has 40 members, all card signing members, but it's also been officially recognized by Paizo Incorporated,
Yay.
Which means that we actually represent, I'm just double checking my collated color coordinated spreadsheet here. I believe we are representing 50 employees. And so the next step is, now that we're officially representing 50 employees, we have to select some representatives, get to a negotiation table with management, and put together a collective bargaining agreement so that, we're already, just the fact that we're recognized takes us from being at-will employed to being protected under the union, but we'll go to fully contracted employees once we get that collective bargaining agreement negotiated and signed. So that's the next step, and hopefully it won't take too long. I know it can take a while to hash everything out, though, so we've got a long road ahead of us.
And that first step that you've taken is already fantastic. I mean, not being at-will employees anymore is a huge thing, especially in an at-will state. So that's great.
I can't tell you how excited I am about this development. I feel like there's kind of a big labor movement going on right now in, pretty much everywhere. And I've been aware that there are systemic problems with working in the RPG production space. Graeme and I have talked about that in the past. Right. But this will, I feel, really help to mitigate some of that. And I'm very excited that Paizo was willing to embrace you and work in good faith. That's also very exciting.
Yes. So what were the beginnings of it? Like, how did the whole process get started?
So what I discovered after getting involved myself is that this has actually been going on for years, possibly before I even joined the company, which I didn't realize at all, despite having been here for almost 4 years. So it had been like little, pockets of people talking, which is how these things always start, right? The first step in unionization is always talking to someone else about it. Because until that happens, you don't have anything. It doesn't matter how much research you do. And so that conversation had been going in small pockets across the company for years. But part of what was happening is, it's an intense industry, and as has come to light over the past 6 weeks or so, and to some extent has been known well before then, it's a lot of difficult work, and the pay is not very great, and in a lot of cases, the Pacific Northwest, Seattle region is where a lot of companies center themselves, because it's where a lot of the talent ends up going, and it becomes this feedback cycle of people who aren't paid very much living in one of the more expensive metropolitan areas in the United States. So what would end up happening is either people would be at the company, so people would be in small groups talking about this, perhaps, but then one of them might get promoted, and now they're no longer eligible, and that conversation stops. Or one of them might get burned out, or might get a better job offer somewhere else, and they leave, and then another conversation kind of burns out. So it had been this sort of, always there, but never really gaining ground or momentum for a good while before any of the events of the past 6 weeks or so. But most recently, the biggest catalyst was the week that Gen Con was to start. We learned that our long-time, 12-year customer service manager, the head of the entire customer service department, one of the key figures at like running our conventions, managing our community, was let go suddenly in a manner that was, at the very least, surprising to all the rest of us. I don't know the exact nature of how much like she saw it coming or didn't, but it caught everyone else by surprise. And all of that had happened 3 weeks after a personnel change, such that an additional position got inserted above that, customer service manager position. And the 12-year veteran wasn't then promoted into that position. Someone else was promoted over top of her. So like when I heard that, I was kind of worried that the customer service manager was going to like resign in protest, because it felt like something that I can't imagine that she wouldn't have wanted the role. And she had, given 12 years, built up an amazing department. Nobody talks about companies having great they talk about the experience being a great customer service experience, but they don't ever really talk about like, this company has customer service that's so great, it makes me want to stay with the company, to the extent I think that Paizos had. And so like she had built a great department. She had a large level of professional and personal respect from both within the company and with our customers and with other people in the industry. And so it was just a huge shock. And so losing her suddenly on the week of Gen Con, everyone was kind of reeling. But within a few hours, we also learned that the lead of the customer service team, the right-hand person right under her, resigned in protest of her being let go.
Yeah,
And so we immediately lost at least 18, but I'll just round and say we lost 20 years of customer service experience at Paizo, 20 years of that institutional knowledge gone in one day right before Gen Con.
Yikes.
So this was concerning on a number of different levels. On the one level, there's like the sort of thing that we can't really know. We would never we'll never be able to get a great answer on it, because like actually having that information, it would be illegal for Paizo to release that information in the state of Washington. So she can tell her story, and he can tell his story, and Paizo really can't say anything at all. But there's that part of it. But there's also just all of the logistical stuff around it. Like, this couldn't have waited another week.
That is.
You did it in such a way that someone else resigned the same day. Like, there's a lot of sort of, aside from the actual core act itself, there were a lot of other concerning factors.
Yeah, the knock-on effects from that are staggering. I mean, personal contacts between them and all the organizations and people they've been working with for the better part of a decade. The quality of customer service that you talked about. Yeah, that's not a sustainable loss to maintain a healthy operation, especially not all at once.
And as you say, right before Gen Con, if some of our listeners may not be entirely aware of the goings-on of the RPG space, but Gen Con is the big tabletop RPG con, right? The big event. So the fact that this happened right before Gen Con was a disaster.
Yeah, it was a PR nightmare.
Yeah.
And yeah, predictably, like they said, I think that was also really frustrating for the workers in general. Is any single worker that's in the union right now could have immediately predicted, maybe not all of them, we probably would have taken a brainstorm session with a couple of us to get all of them perhaps, but every single one of them could have named at least one of those huge knock-on effects like you're talking about. And so there was this frustration at the notion that why would you do it? Why would you do this? Is I think just everybody, and also a sense, we're at at-will state. And so, like, I personally am of the opinion that if someone is a 12-year veteran at a company and is responsible for a department that usually doesn't get accolades in most industries, even at other companies in this industry, and who really, like, the last 12 years has seen an enormous amount of growth.
Yeah.
Because that goes all the way back to, like, the launch of Pathfinder, approximately. So, like, generally, at least I personally am of the opinion that someone who's been around that long is, and who doesn't have, like, there are like two different classifications of reasons to fire them. Either they don't do their job, or they're so toxic to the people around them that they're impossible to work with. Or the other, which is, like, you find them doing something incredibly egregious, like cooking crystal meth in a bathroom at work,
right.
Like something that, like, anybody would be let go for. And I think there was just a sense that none of those seemed plausible, I think, to most of the people at Paizo. And so it was really...
And stuff like that usually comes out
right.
anyway, right? Like, stuff like that we'll
rumor
hear
mill.
about it. We've certainly heard about, egregious things that people in the RPG space have recently been caught at and been let go for.
Right.
So, yeah.
And I remember the fallout from that on Twitter and on TikTok,
right,
where people were incredibly confused. There was no rumor mill. There was no allegations of anything. It was just literal shock that these two people who have become pillars in the community and, like, key components of so many things were just suddenly gone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a really salient point. The fact that a lot of times, stuff is kind of swept under the rug and you don't always hear about it, but usually after a big event like that, people would start coming forward with their stories. People would start, like, pointing to little hints that something was already there the whole time and it was just being ignored, or people weren't seeing it. But yeah, I personally, anyway, haven't seen any of that. Just across the board, people upset about it. Even people, I mean, I saw some kind of almost humorous posts where it was like, someone was like, she banned me a couple of times, but I was, young and a jerk then, and I deserved it, and I can't believe she's gone. Like, that sort of universal level of just complete disbelief. Mm-hmm. And I think that really, the whole experience, I think, underlined to a lot of the working staff at Paizo that our employment suddenly felt a lot more tenuous than it had prior to that.
Mm.
Mm.
And so I think that really galvanized a lot of people having the feeling of, well, we need to do something. And, I'd worked for Paizo for 3.5 years, almost 4 years at that point. I guess it was only a month ago. It feels like forever ago. It feels like, well, yeah, half a year ago but that was really just like 6 weeks ago. I'd been working there for a long time, and I loved the company in the sense of I really appreciated our fans and the community that surrounds our game, and I really appreciate my coworkers. And, like, in my head, I was like, yeah, Paizo is, like, we have our things we have our history, like, there's stuff there, but, like, Paizo is a lot of good people working on a product they really care about, and a bunch of fans who really support us and the work that we're doing. And it was something that I could feel really good about. And so I spent the first couple of days just with a twisted gut, like, did I get this wrong? Did I just completely misunderstand where it was I was working? And I was looking up unionization stuff in my free time, but I had no idea where to start. Paizo has historically had somewhat of a siloization problem. especially when it comes to operations. During my day-to-day, I don't typically have a reason to interact with most other departments.
That seems to be a fairly common phenomenon.
I was going to say,
within the larger industry.
Yeah, it seems to be part of the traditional way in which RPG companies work.
Especially between operations and editorial. And at Paizos specifically, like those two super departments, I suppose, are on opposite sides of the building. So it's not even like we're not even working in close physical proximity. I have to like get up, go upstairs, cross the building to get over to the editorial staff. Oh, wow. And that was before COVID and 18 months of work from home.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of silozation at Paizo, at least for me personally. I liked the people in the other departments, but they were people that I saw if I was tapped to go to Gen Con early to set up. Or they were people that I saw at conventions or at like a Christmas party. And I enjoyed all my interactions with them, but yeah, they just weren't part of my like day-to-day fabric of work. And so I was worried about like, well, okay, like I want to organize something, but I don't know that I know enough people that I can trust with this. Who would I start with? And
that actually just dovetails perfectly into my next question, which was how did you find each other? To unionize in that sort of environment, because that is challenging.
Yeah. So it was almost scripted. Like it was almost like something you'd see in a film or something, where I'd spent 2 or 3 days sort of in this depressive funk, looking up unionization and trying to figure out how on earth I would get something like this off the ground on my own. And a coworker in another department just asked me on Discord, like, hey, a couple of us are thinking about this thing. Does that seem like something you'd be interested in? And I was like, yes, wow, I can't believe it. Yes, amazing. I'm going to like, and they linked me to, a Discord server for this group. I was like, okay, wow, there's going to be like 4 or 5 people in there, and we're at least going to be able to like make a plan, and maybe this will work out. And I click on the link and I open the Discord server, and I'm like person 18 or something.
Nice.
Like up there. And I'm like, oh. And I just felt this like sense of relief washing over me that I didn't get it wrong those years ago when I thought I knew what kind of company I worked for.
Awesome.
I knew exactly. I was right. I was right. And the fact that before I could even figure out how to get started, more than a dozen coworkers had already put something together, and I got into it. I was like, yeah, okay.
That must have felt fantastic.
It was such a switch of mood, because suddenly there was hope, I guess, to bring it back to the podcast thing. It felt like, oh, we actually have a shot at this. Because especially there was, I think, at least in some circles at the company, among some people, sort of a stereotype maybe about the folk in the tech department. I think it's because, technology does things like tell you that you can't install games on your computer, and like technology hooks you up with your equipment. But they're also the person to blame if it doesn't work. And they're always like telling you what to do. So technology is kind of intrinsically the man at like on an internal level anyway.
You're not wrong. Yeah, we're working with a software developer who's created a Twitch bot that is working to make the tabulation of points with our Game of Tomes thing that I mentioned possible. And it's very hard for me to not constantly be going back to him going, it's not working. Why is it not working? Because, he's just a guy, right? He doesn't know why it's not working. He has to figure it out too, and he's volunteering his time. So I can't lean on him too hard, right? So, yeah.
Right.
And I absolutely feel that. I'm a GIS technician.
Okay. Yeah.
At my regular job. And that's just part. People come like, why isn't this map doing what I want? I'm like, I don't know. I have to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. And also, just historically, like I was hired as part of a wave of increased staffing for the technology department to try to a large extent, to try to dig us out of a fair bit of like technical debt that is built up over the years. because it had been a pretty skeleton crew for, a good chunk of years prior. And, stuff just crops up that's like, well, we'll get to that later. And something breaks. It's like, well, that's not the most important thing to fix. And so, yeah, there's a lot of that stuff too. Yeah. Why isn't this working? It hasn't been working for forever. What are you people working on? And it's like, well, it's stuff that's frankly more important than that thing. I'm so sorry to say. But yeah. So anyway, there was like, I think there was some of that. And so, but I was like, the person who invited me trusted me at least. And like people were in there or like, discussing, organizing, like trying to figure out who can we contact, because that's like the scariest part. The first part is, who do you contact? Who contacts them? What do they say? And what's your plan if it goes bad? What's your plan if they are not at all receptive? And worse, like it seems like they're going to tell, like they might tell somebody.
Well, that's
like, what do you do?
That's it, right? When you're beginning the organization of a union, there's always an element of risk. The company may not take it well, right? We've certainly seen examples of Amazon mistreating their employees and sabotaging attempts to unionize. And yeah, what if the company does take exception? So yeah, reaching out to each other has to be done carefully in the initial stages. I hear you.
You smashed through the numbers through this process. I mean, you went from a small number, like 18, 20 people, to a majority, to a super majority in almost no time flat. And that's just not a common story a lot of the time these days.
Yeah.
So how did all that work out for you? What do you feel was like the catalyst that sort of drove all that forwards?
I mean, I read a quote. There's been so much like on social media over the past week or so. But I read a quote that like organizing is the afterthought. The first step is caring about people. And there's so much of that at Paizo that I'm not going to pretend to say that all the recruiting and organizing was easy, but we got so much of that kind of baked in from people's like personalities. So many people I spoke to that we were actually both just dancing. Like it turned out by the end of it, this whole conversation was both of us just dancing around the thought of whether we were going to say something damning in front of the other person. But we were both entirely on the same page from the start. Okay, here you go. Welcome to the team. I reached out to, I was the first person in the tech team to get approached. And I did I quickly turned that around, and within a few days we'd had the majority of the tech team on board.
Nice.
And it was actually, it's amazing. This organization process has done more for interdepartmental like communication and camaraderie than anything that had been done with intentionality by like Paizo as a company. Like I know people, like a lot of people in other departments now that I did not know in the slightest, especially after COVID, because there's a fair number of Paizo employees that have joined since work from home started. I would never have had even an opportunity to have like seen them in real life. I talked about how like difficult, like how much of a barrier there was to just like getting to know people on the other side of the building doing work unrelated to mine. And yeah, with work from home, that just became more so. But I know 39 other people really, really well now. And that's fantastic. But yeah, so we were just, working out, going through like who's eligible, who do we think's eligible, how likely are they to join, who knows them, who would be like the best person to judge whether they would be likely to join, who's the best person to approach them, and just slowly piecing together this conglomeration of people. And, at some point we put together a short list of like likely union candidates, and the CWA seemed like a really solid fit. So we reached out to them and started meeting with them. And I think it's safe to say, I think we blew away our CWA rep. It was really like coaching, like go slowly, go carefully, make sure you got a super majority. All of his advice was tremendously helpful and tremendously useful. But I think ultimately it absolutely blew his mind that we got voluntary recognition within, I guess it's been 5 weeks from like the initial concerted organizing effort. 6 weeks. 6 weeks.
I just want to say, right, If people have wondered about how to do grassroots organizing, I've done a lot of grassroots organizing for various volunteer initiatives that, support various geek subcultures. This is how it's done. This is how we do it too. It's exactly the same process. Who do we think might be interested in this? Who would be an asset to the team? Who do they know? Do we think that we can talk to that person? Let's discuss it and kind of reach out at a mutual consensus of effort to connect. And yeah, I mean, that's where it all starts, guys.
Yeah. It's the mutual trust. The chain of trust is so important. I think over the last 6 weeks, I have direct lines of trust between a lot of these union members and myself. Probably not all of them, but a lot of them. But I had none of that for most of them prior to that. And so it really becomes a distributed effort because otherwise you have to convince each person from scratch, from a position of skepticism within the context of the United States, which even in Washington is just in general, the United States is not very union friendly. People do not approach unions as as just a normal facet of their work environment, unless they happen to have grown up in an environment like in their family where unions were normal.
Not anymore, unfortunately. It's a very similar situation in Canada, unfortunately, where we had very strong unionization and then decades of it being dismantled.
Yeah.
Yeah, a concerted effort to dismantle.
100%. And so even if we presume that we would have gotten there, it would have taken much, much longer, because it would have been a process of convincing each person from scratch and then bringing them in on board. Whereas with those chains of trust, if I know someone at work who trusts my judgment, and I say, hey, this group of us, after I get kind of the sense that they're interested in doing something about improving, the working situation at Paizos, I'd be like, hey, there's a group of us that's organizing. This is, I think, the right way to go. I think they're doing the right things. They're making the right calls. They're taking the right steps. And that chain of trust is what allows that person to say, okay, you know what? Not to go into it blindly, but to put aside the initial skepticism and just say, all right, I'm in, let's see how this goes. And then they are able to grab 3 more people who trust their judgment and so on. And so it creates this network effect where we're able to add people much, much more quickly than we would have been able to if it was a bunch of strangers who didn't really know each other that well. Because a lot of these people have worked together for years and they know each other very, very well. And that was a huge benefit to us.
Now, I've got another question on benefit. I know I'd be remiss not to ask this, but because it's come up multiple times on Twitter. But the support that you received from freelancers, how did that come about, and how did that help support your effort in unionization?
Our freelancers are amazing. I consider our freelancers to be, without question, at least the predominant factor in why we got voluntary recognition within a week of asking for it. Because the freelancers were already in communication with each other on a frequent basis. And this actually, apparently, I learned this, apparently this wasn't always the case. Often, I have heard that at least at some companies, freelancers would be discouraged from talking to each other, so that the company wouldn't have to deal with claims of them stealing each other's ideas. And so, but fairly recently, and I think this happened a little bit before the pandemic. I don't think this was strictly as a result of the pandemic, but within the last couple of years, I'm pretty sure, the Paizos started putting together basically chat rooms for all of the freelancers working on a particular book. And so they'd be in there, and the developer of the book would be in there, and the lead editor for that book would be in there, a couple other Paizo employees perhaps. And it'd be broken down by sections of the book, topics, and people would talk to each other about what they were planning to do, and they would trade ideas. They would generate, I've freelanced for Paizo, So I've been involved in these rooms as a freelancer, not as an employee. And like, people are so generous with their ideas, so generous with their feedback and critique of each other's work. So it's a really healthy, creative space in there. And people are really able to get a lot of fantastic work done. And the final product is far greater than just the sum of its parts, because with that communication in place, they're better able to, a person working in section A on the book is better able to, because they're aware of what the person in section B is doing, they're actually able to collaborate. And so you see a lot more overlap in recent Paizo publications between, like, it's been announced. Yeah, the book, I can talk about the Book of the Dead. It's been announced. In this particular book, they talked about this type of magic over in this section of the book. And so the person who's writing up a bunch of items, magic items, was able to
then makes use of that kind of magic.
Yeah, exactly, precisely. And so you get all of that cross-pollination, and it's just fantastic. So I'm sorry, I'm digressing. So these
no, not at all. Like this. This actually absolutely explains. I'm reading through the Lost Omens, the Mwangi Expanse right now, and the level of integration and smoothness through the book is much, much higher than anything I've run into in a long time. And this process that you're talking about, of actually like having everybody work together instead of sending them all off into their own little silos to produce part A of the book and part B of the book and hope they mash. It proves it to me.
Yeah.
It's almost like if they put together an atmosphere of positive, reinforcing teamwork, rather than a toxic competition, then it actually improves the product.
Right.
Go figure.
Right. I like another example in the Book of the Dead. There's a whole running thread throughout the whole book about Geb, the undead leader of one of the nations in the world, and basically the path through the book follows him as a living person and follows his progression into death and like changes in his personality. So there's a whole like section in the chat room that was basically like, there's a whole section in the design guide, and then people in the chat room were like posting their snippets of like, how does this character sound? What's their like voice? What's their point of view? What kind of words do they use? And so people were able to just read other people's sections about this character and hear that voice, see that voice in front of them, and be able to then take all of those concepts and fold it into their sections. And so that running thread idea, I don't think would have been possible to such a smooth degree of integration without like that sort of thing. So the freelancers, they would be spending hours at a time chatting with each other about books, and it turns out, they kind of like each other. And so they, and also because, most of our freelancers freelance for more than one company, they would have their own independent lines of communication. So what actually ended up happening was they were all just talking to their friends about it, is really what it comes down to. And then a few of them, and I don't know who they are specifically, but a few of them put in the additional level of glue work to take all of these smaller enclaves of friends talking about this issue and like, what should we do about this? This seems not okay. How can we help? And taking those little groups and bringing them all together. And so what we ended up with was 40 plus freelancers who all felt strongly that changes needed to happen at Paizo, and we're all in a position to collectively demand those changes. And all of that happened independently of any of the employee efforts.
Oh, wow.
They jumped on the Paizo accountability. I don't know who started that particular hashtag, and I don't know how much individual like groups of people like subscribe to that or not, but they jumped on the general accountability movement incredibly quickly and put together a list of what changes they thought needed to happen at Paizo, or they would not turn in. They would not accept new work from Paizo, and they would not turn in. Some of them said additionally they had outstanding assignments from Paizo that they would not turn in if their demands weren't met. And
it's really awesome that they're willing to put themselves forward like that. Two comments there. One is that I guess when it's time to steam engine, you steam engine, right? Because it seems like everything came together all at once, that things had been building for some time, and then boom, it all happens. And the other thing that my partner, Jamie, and I were discussing is that when, labor movements tend to build in places where they have hope. Right. So it's places where the employees do feel listened to and like they might have an opportunity to do something in that environment. It sounds like all the cards were in place, and it's, a positive work environment that enabled that communication that let this go forward. So that's really awesome to know.
I think we were all listening to each other, is I think the key. We were all hearing each other's stories about how, in a lot of ways, we weren't being listened to by management. But I think you're right. I just think that environment was one that the non-managerial staff at Paizo, and to some extent the low-level manager staff, because in some ways those low-level managers are really just like, in some ways they're kind of leads. They're like
right.
Some managers are just managers, right? And some are working managers, if that makes sense. And so a lot of those working managers are also...
It does.
They're creating those environments of being listened to. And so that's, I think, what was the underlying infrastructure that you mentioned that was present for this all to be possible. But the freelancers, actually, they moved before the UPW did. They moved before they knew we existed. And so they made their own list of demands for changes. But what was amazing is when the UPW announced, they revised all their demands down to a single demand of recognize the union voluntarily, and we all come back to work and turn in our outstanding assignments the same day.
That's lovely.
That is a very strong message.
And again, I mentioned before, but I would just want to reiterate, I am sure that was the predominant factor in us getting voluntary recognition so quickly, because don't listen to what you hear on the internet. There was not a plausible path for Paizo to just say, okay, you're in breach of contract, we're just going to give out all these assignments to other people, because we need them now, we need them 2 weeks ago. Publishing a book. Yeah, I've written for a book. I wrote for a book a while ago that's not going to come out until 2022. There's a lot of lead time on these things. And it's a very specific skill set. A lot of people kind of have the impression that freelancing is just something that you can just grab random GMs off the street and throw them into that role. And it's a lot more than that. I freelance and I am not anywhere near top tier. I take small assignments and work on some cool things, but I am not like these heavyweights who are, grabbing 20,000 words, knocking it out. And, because I'm doing it on the side for fun and for, some extra money. A lot of these people, this is their career. They grab 20,000 words, knock it out in a relatively short amount of time, and they're off to their next assignment. I can't hold a candle to those people. You can't just grab people and expect them to deliver, our flagship products with no testing. Right. And that's how it should be, right? If I turn in a lot of really good work with the small assignments I'm given, then I might go to a developer and ask, hey, can I have something a little bit bigger, a little bit more consequential? My first assignment was basically taking existing spells from first edition and updating them and bringing them into second edition, basically, and modifying their flavor text to better fit, Galarian and not, the OGL 3.5 Dungeons and Dragons stuff that a lot of them had originated, so there was some level of creativity. I'm proud of that work, but that's the kind of thing a first time freelancer gets. They don't call me up and ask me to write an adventure path.
No,
I wouldn't be able to deliver that in the time frame that they want. So these people are highly skilled professionals, and it's a niche industry. There's not that many of them. 40 of them who refuse to work for you, you're sunk. Especially because they have, there's no time to redo the work that they were going to do for you or had already started doing for you. They have been such a tremendous boon to the organization effort, and we are forever grateful that they took all of that upon themselves for really no guaranteed benefit to themselves. There's some hypothetical things we could include. We're still looking into how we would have to structure it.
This is my next question, actually, right? I was like, what's in it for them, right? And if you can talk about that, right? Because maybe you can't at this stage.
So what's in it for them? Nothing formal. It was purely an altruistic move.
Wow.
They work closely with the developers and the editors. They work closely with Paizos staff, and Paizos staff work closely with them, and they care about the staff at Paizo, and the Paizo staff cares about them, and they want Paizo staff to be able to have good working conditions and to be able to be happy. Now, there are potentially some things that the union can do to make things better for freelancers as well, and we're looking into how exactly we can structure that, because we're not authorized. We can't negotiate on their behalf,
right,
per se, but it might be possible for us to say part of being in a good working environment is being able to offer third-party contractors a strong wage so that it's easier to find, reliable contract. We can, I think, do some of that, and again, we haven't seen any of the books. We don't know what money is available for this stuff.
Right.
A lot of our goals, and to be clear, our goals have been broadly generic because we didn't have everybody that we were expecting to represent. And so now that we have recognition, we're going to go back and revisit all of that in more concrete terms with the entire bargaining unit that we've won from Paizo, which is approximately 50 employees. We have to go back and actually nail down what specific goals are we looking for. And we've started that process too, but we've been largely generic up till now,
right,
about, and a lot of our requests though have been not financial based requests. We did call out the fact that people are really, really underpaid for the area in which Paizo is demanding that they live. That's a problem. And that's a problem whether Paizo has $0 of surplus money at the end of the year, or if they're secretly siphoning, $10 million a year off to the Cayman Islands or something. Their Paizo's financial situation is irrelevant to
it should be. That's right.
To that fact.
Yeah.
And so maybe we can do a lot about that, and maybe we can't, at least in terms of more money per se. But there's a lot of things we ask for that aren't monetary. There's a lot of things based on better, clearer policies. There's a lot of things about doing the right thing, and not even in a sense of we're cutting corners and not doing the right thing because it's less expensive, but just because I'm trying to think here how I want to phrase this. But this has been such a positive podcast experience so far. I don't want to sully it. I think it's just I think a charitable way to put it is that as a company, Paizo is almost 20 years old, and there has been a lot of the same people running it for that entire time. And a lot of those people were fairly young when they started. And I think that there can be a tendency
to hold to an older set of standards.
Once you're in a position of basically unimpeachable power, it can become more difficult to self-reflect and to grow in certain ways. And I don't want to say that universally. I think that a lot of the Paizo management has found themselves having to grow in pretty significant ways over the past month or two. But again, I think that kind of demonstrates the point, right? They're having to grow and challenge their presuppositions and make changes in how they perceive the world because the Paizo employees and the freelancers and the community at large have all demanded that growth occur.
It's the difference between organic, natural growth and growth because of the conditions that you find yourself in, because your old ideas and concepts are no longer in sync with the larger world and industry around you.
We talk a lot about social justice on this program, and I think that in general, the entertainment space, that's all aspects from Hollywood down to RPGs and video gaming, have found themselves in a place where certain ways of doing things that maybe do not account for people who may be more marginalized are being called into question. Mm-hmm. Some people choose to deal with it like the video game community seems to have dealt with it, which is suck it up, buttercup, right? Mm-hmm. And just continue being the way they were. Other people, like the RPG space, seem willing to make changes and try to reduce some of those unintended, in often cases, social injustices, right? So I think this is just part of all of that, perhaps.
Yeah. I think our industry is interesting because of that increased level of engagement with customers. And the niche nature of the business means that each customer or community member has way more influence than they might have or feel they have in like the broader, like you mentioned, gaming space. Just to briefly swing over and like take a look at everything going on over at Activision Blizzard, like that's such a huge behemoth that even with all of the public outcry and pushback about everything going on with them right now, they're so big. And I know, and I'm not trying to be negative here because I actually don't know what the answer is. They're so big, and their games have, or their products have so much fame, notoriety. I'm not sure either of those are the right words, but so much clout behind them that will that outcry register really on a corporate level? Will it force the kind of self-reflection and growth and change that a smaller company with a smaller but very engaged community like Paizo has been able to force? And I don't know. Hopefully, like I hope so. But that's kind of how it always feels, especially with these huge companies. Like you can even take it up. Like games is still a relatively small industry, right? Like, but if like, you think like you talk about like Dow Chemical stuff, and it's like, who even knows? Like, I have no idea what products I have that Dow Chemical, like that some non-consumer facing industrial behemoth like affects. How do I influence Dow Chemical in any way other than hope that my elected officials will actually pass meaningful regulation? And the answer is, I don't know. And that is a very distressing realization that I think most people have.
Truth.
A lot of people say you get more conservative as you age. I think there's like two factors to that. I think one part of it was people tend to get more conservative as they get wealthier. Yeah. And so as like income inequality has grown and a lot of Gen X millennials haven't been seeing significant wealth gains, that transition has become less likely. So we're not seeing that as much, I think.
Nope.
But also I think there's a facet of it where at some point a lot of people look at these huge entities in their world that they feel absolutely unable to influence in any meaningful way. And I think at some point ask themselves, I can either make myself okay with this, or I can be unhappy for the rest of my life. And I think for a lot of people, they really don't want to be unhappy for the rest of their life.
True story.
And they don't feel any sort of hope that they can change it. So even people who had good intentions and who want the right thing to happen, those are the people that turn into the sort of shrug, well, that's just the way it is people. Because their only options that they actually see are, I can be mad about this, or I cannot be mad about this. And either way, it's going to be the same. But at Paizo, to bring it back, like within the context of Paizo, I think there was a real sense of, oh, we the customers can actually make a difference. Like you can go to the Paizo customer service forum, because at Paizo you have to contact customer service to cancel like a subscription. And you can look in the forum and you can see like the week of Gen Con, you can see post after post, please cancel all my subscriptions. Like you can see that, and they could see each other doing that. And they're like, oh, like this is something. I think that's a hopeful moment for people. Like even when they were upset, community and the players realized we actually do have power in this situation. We actually do have the ability collectively to demand accountability, and to demand a better tomorrow. It sounds kind of corny, but we have the ability.
Superman changed his motto recently, right?
Yeah.
Truth, justice, and a better tomorrow.
Fair. Yeah.
No, it's solid. It's hope punk. Also, it was an amazing John Woo movie, but
I mean, yeah, fair point. I mean, I guess corniness is really just like, really just a cynic mocking hope, right? Kind of in some ways.
It can be.
So they like. I think there was a real sense that we can do this, especially when 40 freelancers show up. Like it kind of starts to feel like a movie, right? Whereas everything's hopeless, and then all of the reinforcements show up at the end, and the music score swells. Like
this totally does. Somebody should totally make this movie.
Like it's all happening in a very slowed down, less dramatic fashion.
Yep.
And there's no great musical score unless you have a good Spotify playlist going. But yeah, I mean, it feels that way. Like, a bunch of customers are really upset and they're posting about it. And then they find out that, oh, wow, a huge contingent of freelancers has stepped up to the plate for no self-benefit, like no gain on their own behalf and push for stuff. And then, like, I think part of why we were like fighting with our CWA rep in, friendly terms, but like, he was like, you got to go slow. You got to get that super majority or even more, because like, if you go public, they'll bring in the union busting lawyers. They'll like make all of it. Like, you got to go slow. You got to be sure. And we were like, yes, we get it, but the iron is hot right now.
Yeah.
And we need to strike because we didn't want to risk the players, the community getting burnt out and being tired of the outrage, because it's exhausting.
The burnout is real. We talk about that on this show too. Yeah.
We didn't want to, we were like, how long would these freelancers do it forever? Or how long would these freelancers, even if they wouldn't like buckle, what if they instead just said, I guess it's not going to happen. And like, I'm not coming back to Paizo regardless of what happens now. You're right. Like, there's a moment for this stuff. And so we were really pushing and like scrambling at the last minute to make sure we got enough signatures to skate over that super majority line so we could announce last Thursday, and got it in just under the wire, and then added, a bunch more to the point where we've got 40 members right now, which is, what do I have here? I had 80%, a full 80% of the eligible staff who have signed cards.
Wonderful.
Nice.
Yeah. And so we were just like, we got to get this out there, because us showing up completely blew this, like the ceiling off of this entire thing, right? Like everyone was impressed by the freelancers because it was an impressive thing that they did. But I don't think anybody expected a union.
No.
I don't think anybody expected it to show up with 70% support right out the gate. And like the level to which I'm so proud of all my coworkers, because the level of professionalism with which this was executed is without, in my opinion, compare. Like that logo that a union member put together, not quite unprompted, but like they were like, I think I'll do this. I think I'll put together a logo, and people are like, okay, that sounds great, and then they come back with that, and I'm like, everyone just like, wow,
they're like, yes,
yeah, because not only is it thematically appropriate, not only is it instantly recognizable, not only is it a subtle allusion to the Kobold Union in the first Edgewatch campaign adventure. Not only like a couple people pointed out, you do realize that like this looks so cool that the next in-person Gen Con, the Paizo booth is going to have just a bunch of fans showing up with Union shirts on, just because the design is so cool. Like, how amazing is that?
Important. That stuff is important. The PR campaign is far more important, because you got to change hearts and minds. And one of the ways you do that is, good posters, good logos, good slogans, getting public attention. It sounds, people hate to hear that, because we like to think of that stuff as all being, corporate propaganda, but it's just as important for grassroots organizing, for sure.
Yeah. The slogan story is amazing. We brought in, let's see, he's public. So like Cosmo is our sales manager. And for a while, we weren't sure he was, some of Paizo's org chart is a little messed up. He's a manager, but he doesn't have direct reports. So he actually was eligible. So we kicked him out and then let him back in once we determined, hey, he actually is eligible. But he was like, a logo is great, but we need a slogan. What should our slogan be? And a couple people tossed out some ideas, and it's like, okay. And then one union member put out, "Don't split the party." And everyone was like, oh, all right, 30 seconds in, we're done. Like it wasn't even a question. It's not like, let's get a few more ideas. Like, no, that's it right there.
Never split the party. Yeah, for sure.
And so, boom, we've got a slogan. And it's just that level of input. And like you mentioned, like PR is important. Like so many people just being generous with their ideas about how PR for both the union and for Paizo. Like,
yes, part of that's one thing I have to say. I have noticed no negativity brought against the company itself during the process of this. It was all positive stuff. No, you didn't ask for any boycotts. What you asked for was that people indicate a support or an intention to increase their financial support should the union be recognized. Right? Actually, side question, but it brings me to it. Right?
Go for it.
Because I took you up on it. Right. And what I said was we had a subscription. We basically have every first edition book. We were missing one. And we had to stop. Things changed, but I promised I would look at renewing my subscription and investing in second edition. But I'm one of these old school gamers where, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'm not wealthy. So my question is, why should I get into second edition? What is different in second edition Pathfinder that makes it worth buying, everything over again when I already have all the first edition stuff?
And you want my opinion on why you should do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, the official perspective, I'll just throw that out for contrast. The official perspective is if you like all the first edition stuff and you don't really feel like dropping all the cash on the second, you're fine. Enjoy first edition for many more years. That's why we made it. We love it as much as you do.
Cool.
In terms of, if I'm just speaking from the hip, I would say that I really appreciate how second edition, in my opinion, tries to give an equal amount of customization, an equal amount of choice, but without having as many options immediately available. So, like, you have more smaller choices to make, and the permutation of all of those choices put together is what creates the originality of the character, rather than like in first edition, pick a feat that you qualify for, and like in the core rulebook, there's like a 2-page chart that's just slammed wall to wall with feats.
The tyranny of choice makes it very difficult when you're first creating your character, even for seasoned players like myself. Right. That's the truth.
Yeah, and it's and a lot of those choices are traps, which I'm sure a seasoned player like you is fully aware of.
I've run into that too.
Yeah. Or you know which things not to pick because, like, there's no way that'll pay off. And so, what I really appreciate about, well, I mean, everyone talks about also the 3 action economy, which I love it. Honestly, I need to like play a dedicated 2nd edition game because I'm in a D&D game right now for social reasons.
I love the 3 action economy.
And boy, yeah, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I would love to play stuff that's not D20, but you know, that's a tough sell. You have to basically lure in a bunch of friends.
We've all been there.
And then switch games on them without them looking. But or you're the GM and you're like, guess what we're playing today?
But I'm really enjoying a Science 2nd edition game with my household right now. I play games that aren't D20.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And I also regularly stream a Pathfinder 1st edition game on my channel that takes place during or in one of the fictional universes that I write.
Oh,
so,
very cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. But yeah, so for 1st edition, also, I think there's just been a jump in quality for 2nd edition. 2nd edition tried to shake off some of the bits that were just in there because, you know, Pathfinder is essentially the OGL from 3.5 with Jason Bauman's like homebrew rules modifications on top of it. Now, don't get me wrong. I played a lot of 3.5, and when I saw the Pathfinder changes, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, us too. It was exactly like that.
They fixed grapple.
Yes. Oh, thank God.
They fixed grapple. They made 1st level not suck so much. Like, it's still like I've had good luck in first Pathfinder 1st edition games with like start at level 3 because you'll actually have like things you can do. But it was worse in 3.5, I think. But it was still caught in the web of it was being made for people who like 3.5 and didn't want to leave. So it had to be all backwards compatible in a way that 2nd edition doesn't have to be. So
fair. I mean, it worked. I was reluctant to switch too. I was not at all a fan of 4th edition. I was a very vocal 4th edition D&D for, you know, clarity, right? And I was a vocal critic of it, right? And, you know, kind of tenuous about 5th edition too. But I liked 3.5 and I wanted to do something with that, but that wasn't going to be a thing anymore. And then Pathfinder comes out and I was like, okay, this works for me. But you're right. Now you've got my attention. I'm already, you know, Pathfinder convinced. So yeah, that makes sense. Sense.
So 2nd edition was really an opportunity to kind of get rid of the parts of that they didn't really like, but had to keep in there for backwards compatibility. From an editor's standpoint, and by editor, I mean, not just copy editing, but also the whole like consistency of rules, consistency of voice, all of that stuff. I'm sure the designers are going to be real upset with me because I'm going to get the terminology wrong, but the tagging system essentially for traits and rules in the 2nd edition is fantastic. It's more upfront. It's a little bit upfront to learn.
Yes.
But it allows for so many pieces of emergent gameplay that don't have to be explicitly written into the rules. And so it becomes so much easier once you have an understanding of how those tags interact.
Cool.
That you can just see things come together in natural ways that you could be fairly sure the designers never intentionally planned for.
Nice.
But they just said, okay, this ability can interact with any creature of this type. And, this creature of this type has blank. And so there was some of that already, right? In 3.5, you had creature, aberrations and that sort of thing. But like 2nd edition takes that to the nth degree. And so everything has traits of all kinds, and like feats interact, feats have traits that interact with, or have tags that interact with each other. The multi-classing, I think, is really solid. The archetype system was a really strong way to do I think, better multi-classing than what was available in 3.5. The multi and in Path, I feel like the archetype system is better than the multi-classing system that Pathfinder first edition has. But I really dig the second edition, where you're dipping into feats from other classes and getting abilities, not weakened versions necessarily, but like whole abilities, and you're not becoming less of a whatever class you are by doing so, because you still get all the core facets of that base class that you are, but you get all the flavor from whatever it is you're dipping into. Yeah, that's
great.
Yeah, that's all I got in terms of second edition. I honestly haven't been able to play as much of it as I would have liked. I keep telling myself I'm going to like take a break from fantasy, and then stuff keeps pulling me back to like Sword and Shield fantasy.
Thank you. That's very helpful to me. You got me convinced. This sounds like exactly what I like, which is really easily customizable characters and a fairly simple system in terms of how it all works together. So perfect.
You should check out the character builder they have online.
Oh, yeah?
It's fantastic.
Cool.
Oh yeah, it's very cool. But to bring us back on.
Oh wait, which character builder?
It's the Pathfinder 2. It's the official one, where there's the app version for your phone and the one for your computer. And and you can use that to build up your characters. I was playing around a lot in that the other day.
Watch that space, because it's about to get a whole lot better.
Will do
as well. And that's nothing against any of the tools that exist right now.
Nice.
So watch that space. It'll be pretty excellent.
Nice.
But yeah. Oh, and if you're a GM, I forgot about the GM side of things.
Will do.
My understanding is it's a lot faster to put together balanced encounters of any difficulty. I'm a forever GM, and one of my big frustrations with 3.5 and the original Pathfinder is, especially as levels go up, it becomes I always fear when I have to have a high level encounter that's like NPCs rather than monsters, because at least a monster is like monsters is just some stat blocks. Cool. If it's NPCs, I have to do character creation for like 6 people, and then you're going to chew through them in an hour. Like that's a hard sell. I found like a website that lets me like put together that stuff faster.
Yeah. That's rough.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, I wing it, because I'm like, it's a truism that no matter what you introduce to the party, they will go off of your plot line and do something else bloody entirely, right? So I've learned to just kind of, this is kind of who this guy is. I understand the system well enough that I can sort of come up with statistics on the fly if I need to. Here we go, But I'd prefer to have a better, clearer idea, right? So that's cool.
I'll do that for social encounters, but I had a tough time. Like, I'm like, what feats does a level 13 druid need? Okay.
Yeah.
And another thing is that the monsters in second edition are set up to be more flavorful, I suppose. They have abilities that are more narrative and less just like a skeleton, for example, isn't just like claw and bite. And maybe if you're lucky, they've got like a putrescence that causes a chance of disease, DC 12 or something. Like, instead, it's like, skeleton has like 3 or 4 abilities, and one of them is, pop off its head and chuck it at you.
Nice.
Like, it's just full of like that sort of narrative stuff. So each creature feels unique. Because honestly, as a forever GM, that's a thing I've struggled with in a lot of cases with D20 systems, is where...
And you get to a point, you have a veteran group, they've been together for a while, you mention something, they're like, that's this kind of monster, we're going to need X, Y, and Z. And you're like, I want to surprise you.
Or like, I've had to prep the story for this session, and I've had to put together, those 6 level 13 human characters, and now I'm like trying to remember what all abilities they have so that they're rounds. And and a lot of times it can sometimes if I haven't really thought carefully about how I want that fight to go down because I've run out of time, it's like, like they just run up and attack, and they've got bigger numbers than a level 11 would, but they don't have character necessarily. And so I think second edition bestiaries try to really bake that character directly into the creatures, which is really fun. I got to work on a bunch of creatures for the Book of the Dead, and boy, they were a lot of fun.
This sounds great.
I got to work on like floating heads. So I've got skulls that run around, skulls that fly around and do all sorts of terrible things to you. Yeah, so
that sounds
I hate
awesome.
to be I hate to be that guy to bring us back onto topic. But
and I should point out we are running short of time, guys. We've probably gone a little over what I intended anyway, and so gonna be mad at me, but that's all right.
I've got one last question. That's what are the next steps for the United Paizo workers?
Right. So right now, the organizing committee is working on the transition steps. So that'll involve needing to get nominations gathered up from all the members to figure out who will be both in union leadership. And right now, we're not looking to like make that all that huge. It's, we're just getting started. But then also, more importantly for right now, who's going to be on the representative committee? Because those are the people who will sit down with CWA, lawyer, and representative, and Paizo management and their legal team as well to hash out what the collective bargaining agreement will look like.
Okay.
So really, that's kind of the last thing for the organizing committee to do, is to put together the transfer of power over into elected positions.
Nice.
And to start at least drawing up the blueprints for what the set of demands, or at least goals, will be that they can then go, that the next team will be able to go to the negotiating table and work towards. So that's really where we are with all of that stuff.
Awesome.
We're also in the process of actually selecting which local to join.
Okay.
Right.
We have a short list of that, but we have a few options, and so we're going to try to find the right one. But yeah, and also we're tired, so I think everyone is taking some breather time. Like, we know we have to keep moving forward, but the pace is a little more relaxed. I think everyone.
Fair enough.
A lot of emotional energy over the past week, and a bunch of work over the past 6. So
it's time for a tactical pause.
Yes, tactical pause. Yeah.
Reset and then move forwards.
I love, oh my gosh, tactical pause is the best thing to happen to real-time single-player games.
Okay, I've only got a couple more questions. One question is, do you think this will have a knockoff effect? Like, this is the first union of its kind in the RPG space, and I saw lots of responses which were, that's great, now do WotC, right? WotC, of course, standing for Wizards of the Coast, which are the company that produces Dungeons & Dragons. Do you think it will have a knockoff effect into other RPG companies?
Right. Yeah, so I've seen that. A lot of people were like, are you going to unionize Wizards of the Coast? And the answer to that is no. That's not our company. Like, we unionized where we work. If Wizards of the Coast wants to unionize, they have to do that work. Now, of course, if employees from Wizards of the Coast reach out to Paizo employees and say, hey, we want to unionize, can you provide any assistance? I'm sure we would be happy, thrilled, overjoyed to help in any ways we can. A lot of that's going to be recounting our experiences. A lot of that's going to be, directing them to an organization like the CWA, a larger union that manages a bunch of local, like a bunch of smaller individual shops, because that's not really, we're not set up for that by any stretch. We don't have the reach or the fundraising for that. We couldn't do that if we wanted to, frankly. But no, I mean, we'd be more than happy, I'm sure, in solidarity to assist in however we could. But also, like, WotC is a completely different situation, because how much of WotC are we talking about? Some people are thinking about it just in terms of, oh, well, D&D should also unionize, which, great, but
what about Magic the Gathering? Yeah.
Right. Well, right. But as far as I know, D&D is far smaller than Paizo. But part of that is because, like, I'm sure D&D is able to make use of Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro at Large's like logistical and operations services, right? So they don't need as many people. But yeah, I mean, if you're just talking D&D or even Wizards of the Coast in the larger brand, like that's a different situation. I'm not saying it's like impossible. I'm not even sure. I suspect it would be harder, but I can't even speak to exactly what ways it would be harder. Like I could, but it would just be idle speculation. The point is, like, the people in a shop know what they need, and the people in a shop know how to organize that particular shop best. So it's not a we got ours, so forget about it. It's you have to steer your own, like if WotC employees want to unionize, like, all the best. We'll help however we can, but we're not set up to be able to do that for them or do that on their behalf. Like they've got to decide that they want to do it, and they've got to do it or it won't happen. So yeah, we have no plans.
Basically, it comes down to grassroots organizing has to be grassroots. But one of the ways in which you can do grassroots organizing is by reaching out to other people who have done something similar to what it is you want to do and ask them how they did it and what advice they have.
And I'm sure we'd be more than happy to. Yeah, the first step is always talking to the person next to you, right?
Absolutely.
Always. So yeah, we have no plans of that nature, but hopefully, I mean, I think it would be a little disingenuous to pretend like, yes, this is the first union shop in tabletop RPGs, but I think it would be a little disingenuous for people 10, 20 years from now to imply that like Paizo unionizing started everything, because this entire year has been union action after union action after union action.
True story.
Like there's a huge labor wave sweeping the country.
The continent, I'll say safely, it's affected us here too.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're both Canadians, right?
So, yeah. I wish we could get our Canadian coworkers into this union. Unfortunately, they're not eligible. But we will be trying to negotiate on their behalf, or at least to their benefit.
Right.
But yeah, so huge labor movement. Like, we're part of that. So yeah, I think our effort as part of a larger effort may also inspire other people and to organize their own workplaces and to fight for better conditions for themselves and their colleagues. And I hope it does. I just don't want us to like I just don't want to assign us too much credit for that.
Fair enough.
Because we're caught up in that, movement like all the others are. So
exactly.
I just hope it continues for as long as it can, because there's no reason that people shouldn't be able to have a say in their workplace. And I could go a lot further than that, but I think that's a fundamental and easy truth that no one should have a difficult time agreeing with.
Brilliant.
So that's I think kind of the baseline that I want to establish.
No, you nailed it there. You absolutely nailed it.
So, what is giving you hope right now? We ask this of all of our guests.
Oh, what's giving me hope? Well, this so far incredibly successful unionization effort is giving me hope. The broader labor movement across the world is giving me hope. Just the fact that like it's a lot of stops and starts, but the fact that things are slowly starting to open it's kind of a mixed bag, but it feels like there's at least light at the end of the tunnel on the pandemic thing. I know there's a bunch of stuff still going on, and I know there's a lot of like resurgence, and but it still feels, at least to me, it seems like there's a chance that this will be over, or at least settled into a stable, sustainable circumstance before too much longer. I don't know if that's really a empirically justified hope, but it's a hope I have nonetheless. So,
you know what? Influenza settled down eventually one way or the other, right?
Yeah.
So this will.
Yeah, especially. A thing that gives me hope is I think there. It should be any day now. I think, unless the news has moved on and I've missed it. They should have vaccinations that are approved for children as young as 5.
5.
They said like a month ago by the end of October. So that's the last I.
Yep.
Yeah, we just had them approved in Canada.
Yeah,
yep.
Great.
It was just in the news up here. So
yeah, so like every breakthrough like that helps. It won't solve all the problems related to vaccination or the difficulties involved therein, but every breakthrough like that reduces the side effects of those other issues with vaccination that we're having. So I'm hopeful for as many of those as we can possibly get.
Brilliant.
Really, unionization has been the predominant thing on my mind for the last 6 weeks. So I have to figure out. I have so much email I have to get through. So maybe there's some stuff in there that'll give me hope.
It gives me hope too. So thank you. Thank you for being part of this. Yeah. Thank you for working to make positive change. Thank you for reaching out to your coworkers. This is a story that, I'm really happy to have been able to do a show on, because sometimes it does feel like there never is a light at the end of the tunnel, but here we're looking at it, and that's a good thing. That makes the burnout less,
And thank you so much for coming on this show. I mean, this is one of the big things that I've loved during this entire process has been the transparency and communication that has been coming out from United Paizos workers and the people involved in the organization of the movement. And this is just more onto that, because to be honest, a lot of people just have no idea what this sort of thing looks like anymore. And the fact that you've all been so forward with it has been absolutely phenomenal, because I'm seeing more people talking about union stuff now than I've seen in ages. And it's because they actually see it happening, and happening with something they care about.
Exactly.
And thank you both for having me on. This has been an incredible treat, and you're both wonderful. And I hope we can talk again sometime in the future.
I definitely do too. When things are more stable after the, things have been formalized more, maybe we'd love to have you back.
Whether on or off the podcast, I'm being open-ended with that. But yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
And people can find you on the internet.
So I have a really boring Twitter handle. That's Brian M. Bauman, Bauman. I made it with the intention of it being a professional account, and so boy, that's about as professional as it gets, I guess. That's really it. Follow me if you want deep dives on unionization process, because that's what I seem to be posting a lot of these days. So
perfect. Thanks so much again. So that was our interview with Brian Bauman. Before we continue, we just want to remind our listeners we have a Ko-fi account now. We also have a Patreon. If you're wondering how to support us, that's patreon.com if this goes on. There's multiple tiers. Alan has started doing 5-minute book reviews. Discord. There's discounts to the Rambo Academy for wayward writers, which, if you're a writer like me, is an awesome learning tool where you can get direct online courses, both in person and in web format that you can do at your own pace, from real, active science fiction and fantasy writers in the field who you've probably heard of, and they do some great stuff. I'm a real fan of Anne Leckie's space opera course. It's awesome. And if you want anything from me, just let me know. I'd be willing to throw in stories, live readings, maybe some music from time to time. I'm a filker part-time. I do stuff about books and fantasy and science fiction. So yeah, just, make a comment and let us know. And we also have an announcement. Our co-host and audio producer, Sound Maiden, is leaving the show, at least for a time, because they're welcoming a new arrival to the family. So congratulations to her and her husband, and we wish them all the best. So, Graeme, what did you think?
I thought it was a great interview. Throughout this entire process, as I said at the end there, they have been nothing but open and transparent with the processes and communication outwards about what's going on. And this just continued that. It was a really good talk. We got some really good insight into how things were going and what led up to like the catalyst event that led to the formation of the United Paizo Workers Union. And just good overall.
Yeah, me too. I was really inspired by all the positivity. Normally, when there's a labor dispute, blood gets bad. You know, like things can get really, really tense, and accusations start getting thrown around, and it gets ugly. But it seems like all parties, Paizo included, are approaching this with professionalism and good faith, and it's heartwarming to know that people are willing to reach out for and help each other in what is often difficult times. I'm especially inspired by how the freelancers just went, screw our demands, just recognize this union. That's beautiful.
Yeah, that was fantastic. And the fact that he was so open about the importance that the important part that the freelancers played in the entire process was great.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining the team, by the way. It's interesting. I really wanted to do this interview with you in particular because our listeners may not know that Graeme has a fair bit of experience in the freelancer space in RPG writing, and he's currently working for a gaming company. Blue Planet is the game that he's working on.
Yes.
And he's had some negative experiences that I wanted to talk about at some point. That's a very different story from what's going on here. We won't get into it now, but I really kind of wanted his perspective. And the fact that we're both like super gaming nerds is pretty awesome. Graeme is a very vocal proponent of representation in RPGs. He writes about racist and sexist and homophobic tropes and ways in which these things could be taken out of games. And I look forward to your insight on future podcasts.
I'm looking forward to doing more podcasts with you. This has been a long time in the organizing to finally get me here after I agreed to it. And I'm really happy that this was our first podcast we were able to do together.
Yeah, me too.
Covering this topic. This is some momentous stuff.
Absolutely. I agree completely. It's going to be fun. I had a lot of fun today. So.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So don't go away yet, everyone. Coming up next, we're starting, you may have noticed that in recent podcasts, we've started doing small, what we're calling our column sections at the end of the podcast, which might be a book review or whatever. And we're going to start with Graeme's first column. He's going to tell us about his perspective on world building.
Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to the second part of the podcast. My name is Graeme Barber and I'm going to be talking to you for the next few minutes about world building. Now, what is world building? World building is the exercise in creativity where you manufacture the components of your world for your work in progress, whether it be literature or games, which is my area of expertise. And the whole point of it is to create a world that is immersive, interesting, and that helps hold not just your story together, but helps hold the reader's interest or the end user's interest. Now, when you're doing your world building, there are some mistakes that people can make. And the most frequently run into ones that I have seen are that they either make too much information, like they focus in entirely on the world building to the detriment of their work in progress or the game that they're trying to write for, or they go too far the other way and don't provide enough information or build enough in order to make the world believable, forcing the reader or the end user to fill in the blanks and try to figure things out themselves, whether or not they have the right cultural anchors or psychological anchors to do so. So what I like to do when I'm world building, and it's something that I recommend that people try out at least, is to world build for your specific needs first. And that is the core of your world. And then moving out from that, you have concentric rings of detailed information. And the detail becomes less the more the rings get away from your immediate needs. And what I find is that by world building like this, I have an idea about what's going on in the wider world. I have an idea of the technology, cultures, interactions and all that good stuff that are happening. However, the main focus and where the most detail is in the area that concerns my story or my adventure the most. And by doing it this way, I have that information, I'm supporting it, but if I need to branch out or if I need to draw in something from somewhere else, I at least have that skeleton framework to work with. And it's worked pretty well for me so far, and I recommend that people try that, as I said. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is balancing your world building. And broadly speaking, there is a spectrum of world building. At one end, there is minimalist building. So very little information is presented, and it is up to the readers or end users to create the majority of information for the world themselves. Now, this may sound like bad world building, but it isn't necessarily. If you're working with an incredibly familiar area, for example, if you are working, say, in a modern setting or urban fantasy, or you are working maybe 20 minutes into the future, if I can draw on TV tropes, for example, then there isn't as much to fill in. People live in the modern world and they know what mobile phones are. They know about international relations. All those anchors are there, so it's not too bad. But the more you deviate from the regular world, the more you need to add to it. And that's where you get into the other end of the spectrum, potentially, which is too much information. Now, this can happen when you simply inundate your world with data. And instead of feeling inspired or interested or immersed, some of your readers and some of your end users will end up feeling smothered by it all. And this can especially happen if you only focus in on small specific parts of your world all the time, because those places will feel absolutely filled, and the people who are reading or using your product will not think that there's anything else to the world because it's the only area that you focus on. And now in the center, between those two extremes, you have the balance. And when you have the balance point, it is fantastic, because at that point, there's enough information that your readers or end users are getting the experience, they are getting the feeling, they're getting those mental images and vibes that you want them to get. And they feel immersed and they feel interested, but they don't feel like they're being smothered. And so in a book, this is where a person finishes the book and wonders, oh, I wonder, what does this people do? I wonder what they're all about. Or in my case, if they finish a game or something like that, they think about, or finish reading a game book, they're like, what's going on in this place? I wonder how this applies here. I wonder what else is going to happen, or what I can do with this. Or they feel inspired by it, and they'll create their characters or backgrounds based on the material that I provided. And so my goal, and I hope most listeners' goals, will be to aim for that balance point where there's that good amount of information that is inspiring and interesting to the people who are listening. Now, the final part that I'm going to talk about in this short discussion on world building is using your world building, because there is a tendency to do a lot of world building with people, but they do so much they get burnt out, or they get tired, or they just focus in on one little part of their world after doing all the work and never go back to everything else. That's not bad, but it's a waste of effort for all that world building that you've done. So when you're using your world building, draw on it. If you've created an expansive history for your fantasy world, for your writing, that includes, empires of giants and dragons and titanic battles of the past, have reminders of that scattered around in your world. Use that as a jumping off point for adventures or short stories, all that sort of thing. Not everything has to be immediately focused on what's happening in the world right now, because much like in the world we live in, our past affects us. And we can see our past, we can interact with it. And it's more so in these sorts of settings. So by drawing on your world building to effectively act as a springboard into more adventure, more writing, more interesting things, that way you're putting your work to work for you, as opposed to simply having it there as a brick of information that your readers or end users may engage with, but ultimately won't care about because it's not something that's being used. So always use your world building, integrate it into your writing, integrate it into your adventures, and the results will be better.
can almost categorically state that, because obviously there's always a chance that it won't, but in my experience, when you integrate your world building and actually draw on your own world building for your work and integrate it in, it will result in a better end product. Thank you very much for listening. My name is Graeme Barber, and this has been our short talk about world building.
If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey with production by Joan Iglesias. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower. Additional music is by Christopher Snydrowski, and outro music by Save Lauradia. Intro by Dave Robison. A special thanks to our guest, Brian Bauman. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.